Well, we just got back from Thanksgiving, so let's do that. You went to Utah, didn't you?
Yeah.
Over Thanksgiving, or were you somewhere else?
Just before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And then I'm heading to Wadi Rum, so I'll talk about that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Gosh, I feel leaderless right now without Dave.
Well,
Dave's
you
usually
should fill in. You're more like Dave than
Dave's
I am.
okay, here we are. Here we go. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the No Barriers podcast on the waning days of 2018. We've got Eric and Jeff here. We're missing our fearless leader, Dave Sherna, who's still digesting his tryptophan from last week's Thanksgiving.
We don't need him anyway.
Well,
we're casting him out.
Let's say we do need him.
All right, yeah, we actually do need him, Dave. We love you, man.
Yeah, we just wrapped from Thanksgiving, so E-Dub.
Well, yeah, I had a great family vacation, man. We usually don't cook, because we're a little bit lazy when it comes to cooking, but
let's just say you can't cook.
No, I can. You should see me with a knife. It's way scarier than watching me climb, because the knife is like a millimeter from my fingers as I'm chopping away. Yeah. But we all took something, a different food, and we all cooked and we all contributed. So it was really awesome. And before that, I had a super fun trip to Moab out climbing for a couple days. So I slept in my friend's van and climbed some beautiful towers in the desert.
Excellent. I did not have that experience. We were in Arkansas at my wife's farm, my wife's family farm, and I chased deer around for a full week, and then I finally caught one at the end.
You caught it with your bare hands?
With a net.
Oh, I see.
And a Bowie knife.
Yeah. Cool, man. That's so redneck.
We supplemented Thanksgiving meal, and I got a pretty deer rack to go in my barn. So today our guest is a sort of a legend in the climbing community, and
sort of.
All right, I don't know. Well, I'll suspend sort of until we've had our conversation. But
Craig Demartino.
Craig Demartino's here, and he's had quite the ride. And I'm I know all I know is the legend part. I don't know the backstory part. So
he's got a great film that's out about him right now. Craig's an amazing climber. He works used to. But now he's with Adaptive Adventures. He's been with Adaptive Adventures for 3 years. They're an amazing organization. We'll learn about them. And we want to dive into Craig's story and Craig's life. I see you, I quote unquote, see you, Craig, at Earth Trek sometimes. Yeah. You'll be climbing nearby.
Yes.
You're climbing your 513s while I'm climbing my 5.9s.
No, not at all. Thank you. It's fun to be
Welcome,
here.
Craig.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and so it's great having you in Colorado, and great having all the work that Adaptive Adventures does. It's really awesome.
They're an amazing group of people. I didn't know them that well. I've been in the adaptive world for about 15 years, but I knew them kind of in passing until like 4 years ago when we started chatting about their climbing program and building it and making it into something fun and long lasting. And so it's been really fantastic to get to know everyone there.
So you came on 3 years ago. Tell us what Adaptive Adventures does.
Adaptive Adventures specializes in getting folks with physical disabilities active again. And so we do 5 or so sports, and I do particularly just the rock climbing thing. So I only know rock climbing, but what they do is they get programmers who know their sport in and out, and so kind of experts in that field, and they each do their own sport. So we have a ski guy, we have a kayak, me climbing, scuba, and biking, and so we make sure that then that person kind of works with our athletes as they come through our programs and teach them kind of the basics of each sport. Like for me with climbing is I start them in the climbing gym and get them kind of comfortable in that setting and then move them outside. So the idea is always to kind of go from the gym to a crag somewhere, so whatever that looks like. So whether it's here in Colorado or Red River Gorge or wherever we kind of think is a good fit, we kind of work them that way.
It's so great to have these rock gyms, right?
Oh, it's great.
Like
you can go
incredible.
in any city in the country and you can kind of throw a rock and hit a gym. So it's fantastic. Like I can go to no matter where I am, I can find a climbing gym, which is great. So you can get this population that maybe wouldn't be exposed to climbing really quickly.
So give us a sense then of the participants that come, into the program and a little bit of a cross section of the demographic there. And then, how long are they with you? Is this is this months, weeks?
It depends. So we work, half of our population is veteran based, and the other half is civilian based. So if I'm working with veterans, we're a vetted VA provider. So those people come in for a 6-week program usually. So I'll get them for 6 weeks, and in that 6 weeks, I'll get them 2 or 3 times. And so those guys, I take them climbing first time in the gym, and then the second time maybe in the gym. If it's nice out, we'll go outside, and then the third time we try to always be outside. It just depends on the program. And then they do have some programs that run just till they run out of, that person is kind of graduates out. So that could be any amount of time. It doesn't really have an end point. And so those guys I have kind of on a reoccurring basis. So then I get to kind of teach quite a bit too. And then the civilian side, those are kind of club-based models. So we meet in climbing gyms like Earth Treks here in Golden, in Englewood, out east, where twice a month the athletes come in for 2 hours and they climb with folks with physical disabilities, and then people like me who kind of facilitate whatever's coming through the door. So if it's an amputee, if it's a person in a wheelchair, if it's a person, no matter what the disability is, we can get them climbing, and that's kind of our skill set.
Yeah, my friend Mark Wellman, who you know,
Yes,
he's like
very
the
well.
grandfather
He is.
of adaptive climbing.
He is.
I don't know if he'd like that. But,
Speaking of legends.
he told me once, he's like, if you can move a finger, you can, now with the adaptations, you can get somebody up the wall. So
Yes.
like, tell us about like what's the craziest innovation that you've seen? Because like paras are climbing El Capitan, and
Oh, yeah.
there's that kid that climbed. He's not even a kid anymore. He climbed the Chief as a quadriplegic.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, what are the craziest innovations that you guys do?
So because it's been kind of a progression and an evolution of equipment, it's been cool to have, like, you can have a quadriplegic now who has even very little hand use at all. We can kind of get them with something called, an easy seat and an ascender. We can have them kind of in something with a hand adaptation that will attach them to the bar, and they can kind of be climbing right away. I can have a person come in a wheelchair and have them climbing in 10 minutes. And that kind of, before when we got into it, it was just a bit of a process to kind of figure out, okay, how do we streamline this and make it effective for that person? But now with these things that we have at our disposal, we can kind of easily get a hand that works that doesn't work. We can have a back that works that doesn't work. We can really not shy away from anything, whereas before I feel like when I first started, we were a little bit leery of certain things, whereas now it's like, like Mark said, if they can lift their finger, and actually, even if they can't lift their finger, I'd take it one step further now. Even if they can't lift their finger, we can still get them climbing. If they really want to get out of that chair and go up the wall, we could make it happen.
Stephen Hawking.
We could get Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking could get
Absolutely.
up on a wall.
Absolutely.
I mean, rest his soul.
Yeah. It'd be harder now, but yes,
Okay.
for sure.
So can you back us up just a little bit, Craig? And obviously you're deep into this journey of yours with helping adaptive climbing and being such a big integral part of that. Back us up to 2001, prior to your injury, and give us a sense of where you were then, and then maybe tell us a little bit about your injury and how that perhaps was the catalyst to where you are now.
And I think in 2001, I was the regular climber that you meet anywhere. I was a dirt bike climber. I was very interested in what I was doing, I was very focused on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to climb and where I wanted to be. And I was married to my wife, Cindy, at the time. We were married probably 10 years at that time. And, we were kind of climbing around the country with our kids and taking, our kids were really young at that time, 2 and 4. And we just kind of bounced around different areas. I was working as a photographer, and I could kind of hit different zones, and everything was working great. That's what I tell people that all the time. Like, I didn't have a single complaint at the time. Everything was great. And then in 2002, in July, I went climbing with a buddy of mine up in Estes Park at Lumpy Ridge, and just hiked out to this cliff that we had heard about this one route out there, and we were going to go check it out. And we got to the route, started up the route, it started raining, so we had to bail off that route, and he knew of another route up the hill a little bit that was way overhanging, and he's like, it'll probably be dry, so let's go and look at that. So wandered up the hill to that, and sure enough, it was dry, and he didn't want to lead it. So in climbing parlance, I don't know what your audience is, leading person's going first. And so he wanted me to do that, and then we were going to set up something called a top rope, and I was going to attach the rope at the top, come back down and belay him from the ground, and we were going to then kind of run laps on this one particular climb because it was dry. And top roping is a pretty simple term. It's kind of like, you know, it's one of the most basic terms in climbing, so I didn't feel the need to like kind of figure out what that meant with him. He and I climbed together all the time. He had climbed, I think at that point, for like 15 years or something silly, and at that point I had been climbing about 11 years or 12 years, and so, you know, very experienced, didn't think anything was awkward or weird, and so I started up that climb, and I got up to the anchor took about 15 minutes to leave the pitch. It was a 100-foot pitch, and I was placing gear in the rock as I went, and got up to the anchor, which was 2 bolts driven in the rock, which is again very typical, and I clipped in directly with 2 long slings and carabiners, and sat down on that and told him that I was off belay, which is again a very simple term that just tells him that I'm now safe and attached to the anchor at the top of the pitch. And he did what any other climbing partner would do, is he took me off belay, which means he took the rope out of his belay device and actually walked about 10 feet away to get his shoes out of his climbing backpack. And so I was at the top. The climb was real steep, and I couldn't see him, but I could hear him really well. And so he's doing his thing, I was doing my thing, getting the rope ready to be lowered. And once I got the rope kind of, and the anchor kind of sorted the way it looked nice and safe and was going to run nice and smoothly, I yelled back down to him that I was ready. And he couldn't see me, and so he yelled back up, and he's like, okay, you're good. And I heard you're good, and I thought, oh, okay, now he has me on belay, he's going to lower me back to the ground. And so I didn't bother to double check that with him. Again, super basic term. Didn't think there was a need for clarification. And so I kind of pulled in. I felt the rope as the last thing. I just kind of reached over and pulled on the rope a little bit because it was running off to my right down the crack climb that I'd come up. And I felt 100 feet of rope out. And as anybody who climbs knows, the rope is the heaviest thing we carry. And so I felt tension. And I was like, okay, he's got me, no worries. Pulled in, and I unclipped, and I sat. And I immediately started to fall from the anchor. And so it was a real narrow ledge. It was only about 6 inches wide. It was really long. And so my heels were already hanging off. And I started to fall, and I thought, oh, he has like a loop of slack in, because that happens quite often.
Right.
And I started to fall, and I thought that's going to come tight really quickly, and then it didn't, and I kept picking up speed, and I was like, okay, maybe he's way back from the wall, because again, that can happen. I had a partner.
It's stunning how you had enough time.
You
to
have so
think
much.
about
You
all
think
this.
it happens so fast, and it really does, but like your mind is so quick, and so all these possibilities jump in your brain because I've been climbing for a while.
And there's hope.
Yeah,
There's hope that's sitting in there somewhere.
and there's an expectation of this system works. It's going to stop me. And then all of a sudden, you get to a certain point, and for me, it was probably around 10 feet, where I was like, he hasn't tripped and fallen. He hasn't had a loop out. Something is really wrong. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to see where I was going, because I couldn't see anything because of the steepness. And so I pushed on the rock really hard, and it pushed me out, so I could now actually see the ground. But I was 100 feet up, which is, you know, that's a 10-story office building. And so it's like stepping backwards off that building and picking up speed and falling. And the push was great because I could see where I was going, but it tipped me, and I was actually falling horizontally. And my partner said when he looked up, he saw me coming through the air horizontally to the ground and just picking up speed. And about 20 feet from the ground, there was a dead tree that we had both walked around to get to the climb. And I hit that with my head, and it stood me right back up to standing. And so I actually landed standing on both feet, probably leaning a little to the right, and it just exploded my feet. So my climbing shoes exploded from the impact, and I had compound fractures on both legs of the calcaneus, which is your heel, the talus, which is right above your heel, and then tib and fibular on both sides. And so they all came out on the inside of my legs, and then severed the artery in my right leg as well, so I was bleeding really badly. But hitting from that far up and that hard, the shockwave has to go somewhere. And so it compressed my spine and broke my back at L2, which is kind of right through your belly button. And it actually hit so hard I don't even have it anymore. When it powdered, sprayed into my spinal canal, and then kind of kept moving up and broke all the ribs on my right side, punctured my lung on the right side, broke my elbow, burst a sacs, tore my shoulder at the labrum, and then broke C5, C6, which is through your Adam's apple right here. And then I just crumpled down on the ground. And so I landed probably 10 feet from where I started. I came straight back down the climb basically. And
What was your level of consciousness?
I was wide awake, and so I don't remember, like we were saying, like your brain goes so fast. I don't remember hitting the ground. I remember falling the whole way though. I remember seeing the ground. I don't think I saw the tree. As I think about it, I don't think I saw the tree. And then the next thing I knew, I was looking at my partner. He was over my head, looking down at me, and he was screaming at me. And I just remember thinking, what the hell you're so confused. And I was just like, what the hell am I doing on the ground? I couldn't put that together, like why I was on the ground. And all I could feel, it felt like somebody had a rock in my back. Because I had landed in the talus blocks, like you guys know, like they're big and chunky and yucky. And I was laying in those blocks, and my partner's name was Steve, and I said, just get me off, I'm laying on a rock, just get me off the rock. And he was like, shit, he hit from so far up, I'm just gonna make him as comfortable as I can. I was bleeding really badly, and he pulled me off the rocks into like a dirt patch and put a tourniquet on my leg. He had like a little bit of first aid training, and put a tourniquet on with a sling and a stick. And then he was like, what do we do? And I was awake, we talked and tried to figure out what happened and what we were gonna do. Because Lumpy Ridge, for the folks listening who don't know, it's about 4 miles long. And we were at the very end of it. We were at Sundance Buttress, which is the last rock.
There's no cell coverage.
No cell coverage.
Batman.
Right. So it's past Batman. It's past the book. Past all that stuff. It's way the hell out there. Way the hell out there. And so
and by the way, no established trails really. I mean,
correct.
Getting back in there, you eventually find an artery, but you guys were back. It was backcountry.
We were back, and to make it worse, we driving up there. I said to my wife when I left, I was like, "Hey, we're gonna go to this other place called the Monastery." But that summer, there was all these forest fires up in Estes, and it was super smoky in the valley. So we were like, screw it, we'll go someplace different, and never told anyone. We just were like, we'll just change plans. We'll go over here because it's clear. And so my wife didn't even know where we were. So we headed up this other spot, and once we were on the ground talking, about 4 miles in. So when we hiked out there, we kind of like slightly jogged going out there, and it took us about 40 minutes to get there. So, but now like, obviously I'm not jogging anywhere. And so Steve was like, I gotta go get help. And so he kind of packed me into the talus a little bit so I couldn't roll. And the tourniquet was on, and he was like, I'm just gonna go get help and I'll be back. And he actually took off, and he was out of my peripheral, like I couldn't move.
Did he stem the bleeding?
He had the tourniquet, I think, stopped it pretty well, like slowed it down so where I was still bleeding, but it wasn't quite as bad.
Right.
But he was like, there was blood everywhere. He's like, there was, bones sticking out. He's like, there's blood everywhere. And he's like, I figured you were just gonna die, so I figured I'd better do something quickly. And he took off, and then all of a sudden he was back. And in my mind, I was like, God, that was so freaking fast. Like, how did he do that? And I thought I blacked out or something. And he was like, dude, I have a cell phone. And this is 2002, right? And so like Eric said, there's no coverage in the park at all. I don't think I get coverage today. And he popped his cell phone open and turned it on, and it was, he got a signal next to Sundance, which is 1,000 feet. It's insane that he got a signal. He dialed 911. The lady picked up. She's like, okay, I'm going to patch you through to Rocky Mountain Rescue, who do all the rescues in the park. And the guy who picked up that call was Eric Gabriel, and he was the head of Rocky Mountain Rescue. And he was like, oh yeah, where are you? And Steve told him the name of the climb, and he's a climber. And he's like, oh, I know right where you are. Don't move. And he split, and then I just learned this. This is really odd to me. A week ago, 3 of the guys who he called were not only paramedics, they were triathletes, and they were training in Estes. They were running, and he called them when they were running. And he was like, get your pack, keep running, and just go right to Sundance. And so I had, within, I think, 45 minutes, I had 4 EMTs next to me, which is uncanny.
So unbelievably lucky.
Incredibly lucky. And so they started doing, the triage of, okay, how do we get them out of here? And being that far back, they had to start a big old rescue deal. And I had no kind of idea of how hurt I was. I just, like I said, I just thought my back hurt. Because my feet were shattered so bad I couldn't even feel them. And didn't know my neck was broken, didn't know my ribs were
You're partly numb.
You're numb, and I think you have so much adrenaline going through you at that time, and I wasn't in shock yet, probably.
But you did go into shock at some point,
all the way
I'm sure.
out, for sure.
Yeah.
Once Eric kind of got there, I think I kind of like started getting
it's always the
loopy.
case when the rescuers arrive. That's the dangerous point, because
Right.
then the rescuee starts to concede.
Yeah.
Before that, you were hanging on, right?
Right. You're
And
like,
you're
I gotta help myself, and
then okay, you're here. I can.
yeah, he's gonna take care of me now.
Yeah.
And
you probably start circling the drain then.
you do. You circling the drain is a good way to say it. And Eric said to me, like he said, I can't give you any pain meds because I think your lungs are punctured. So he's like, you're not breathing well, and so he's like, we're just gonna have to gut it out. And so I was like, that's fine. Let's just move this along. And so they got the litter there. I don't know how long that took. I know from the time they picked me up in the litter to the helicopter in the valley was 5.5 or 6 hours. So in that time frame somewhere, they were just carrying me down this hill and just bouncing me down. And Eric would kind of come in. They had me in a C-collar at that point and a back brace at that point, strapped onto the board. And he would come in to my peripheral vision, and be like, how's it going? How you doing? And we would talk. And again, you don't know how hurt you are. And so the one time he just said to me, do you want me to call your wife? And I was like, oh God, that's a horrible idea. Like, no, don't call my wife. Let's just see what happens here. Because again, I figured we were just getting out of the park. And he was like, okay, that's cool. And he just left. He didn't make a big deal about it. And then, I don't know, a bunch of time later, he's back in my peripheral and he's like, hey, do you want me to give your wife a call? And I was like, that's weird that he asked twice. Like, that's very strange. Like, and I said, okay, go ahead and call her. And so then, boom, the next thing I know, she was there. And she had driven from Loveland and ran all the way in to where we were. And she just kind of popped up in my side, and we talked for a little bit, and then she was gone. And that's the last thing until the helicopter that I really recollect. Because my feet, they must have had them like kind of taped together or bandaged together or whatever. And when I didn't know they were even broken. And when they put you in flight for life, there's a bulkhead. When they slid the litter in, my feet hit the bulkhead. Oh. And that's when I knew my feet were broken. Because I was like, oh my God, they'd hurt so bad. It felt like my bottom half exploded. And the flight nurse looked at me and said, okay, we're just going to go ahead and give you something now. Because now you're on the chopper, so they can kind of do better medical care at that point. So he gave me something, and that's the last thing I remember. Evidently, I was awake the whole way, chatting and having a grand old time. Arm out the window. And he was great. And then, I woke up in ICU with a ventilator in, tied down to the bed.
When you tell the story, you're like very matter of fact, and you're even chuckling a little bit. But like, I'm kind of like squirming hearing this story a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But
because as a climber, you can relate to it.
Oh, as
Exactly.
a climber,
Yeah.
I mean, everyone almost dies.
Mm-hmm.
I would say practically everyone I've ever talked to almost has one of these moments.
That's true.
And they get lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't get lucky.
I didn't get lucky. But I did. I mean, in a lot of ways, I really did. Like,
Yeah.
I had so many things stacked in my favor
Right.
when it happened. But every time I tell it to a group of climbers, they do what you're doing, like wring their hands.
Right,
and squirm.
that's what I'm doing right
I know,
now
I'm
for
watching you
everyone.
wring your
Yeah,
hands.
my
And
hands are
it's-
sweating a little bit.
And it's like, oh God, that could happen. Because what happens is it could happen to you. It
Yeah.
could happen to all of us.
Because your story of lowering off and saying I'm good to you're here, you're told I'm good to go,
Yep.
and you relinquish and you let
Yep.
go. We've all had that little twinge, like, okay, I'm assuming I'm good to
I'm
go.
good.
But have you
That's-
told the story so many times that you know what I mean? Like it doesn't affect you
I have.
anymore?
It doesn't, like now I've told it, since 2002, I've probably told it
Right.
1,000 times,
Yeah.
because I do, like you, I speak to audiences, I
Yeah.
speak to groups, I do films, and so you have to tell it, and you can't be, I feel like I can't get super emotional about it, because then the interview will just derail, and that will be that, so I want to give them more than that, hopefully.
So in the spirit of that, and I'm sure that there was obviously some deep dark days following that. You probably had multiple surgeries. Maybe just maybe give us a nutshell of how that period, how it lasted for you, and if there was a moment or an event that sort of catapulted you out of wherever you were post-operatively.
Yeah, because the hero's journey says okay, you get hurt and then you wake up in the hospital and you're like, I'm gonna climb again. It's like, but I don't know if that's real. You know what I mean?
God,
like,
that's
what's
so
the
not.
real thing
That is not real.
that goes through your brain? That
I mean,
Kids and a wife.
exactly.
And, you're like, holy shit, what am I doing?
And like climbing, remember that was like a huge part of my identity, and so it's like, oh, who am I now? Like I know I'm gonna be a dad, I know I'm gonna be a husband, but it's like other than that, I have no freaking clue what's gonna happen. And so for me, it was like I woke up, I was on a ventilator for 5 days, so I couldn't even speak for 5 days. And so after they take the ventilator out, you can at least ask questions like, what the hell just happened, and what's the prognosis, and they only tell you certain amounts. And so we did a surgery almost every day or every other day to kind of do something. And so when I first went in, they fused my back first, so I'm fused from L1 through 4, and then they fused my neck C5, C6, so to kind of control the paralysis there. I still have a spinal cord injury because I broke my back so badly, so I have, like, they call it saddle anesthesia, so the back half of me is numb all the way down from basically my belt all the way down, and I can't feel my left foot even though I have my left foot. I can't feel it, and so that was like, okay, let's get that under control first, and then we'll move them. And so they moved me out of ICU, and they did more surgeries on my feet and put a bunch of hardware in. And
Trying to salvage your right
yeah,
leg.
trying to salvage my right leg, and the left leg was a little bit better. Exactly.
Yeah.
My left leg was a little bit better, I guess, for whatever reason. And then they moved me to extended care, and I stayed there for basically for 3 months. So I left on a Saturday, and I went home 3 months later with, in a walker, in a wheelchair, with this idea of like, oh shit, like, who am I gonna be now? Because when I initially got a little bit stabilized, I would talk with Cindy all the time and say, she said to me early on, she's like, if you wanna climb again, like, I totally get it, but if you don't wanna climb again, I absolutely get that as well. So whatever you wanna do, we'll figure it out together, and she has climbed as long as I have, so there was a lot of understanding of like what it would entail, like if you go back to climbing with this kind of a body, like what's that look like. And so,
But at the time, you still had both your legs.
I had both my legs,
Right.
and sort of seemed like I was gonna kind of transition into being able to walk again. They didn't know if I could walk again. They were very skeptical at that point because of all the back and neck injuries. And so they said, let's just see what happens. And at 3 months, went home and again in a wheelchair, and then that stayed that way for about 6 months. I was in a wheelchair and slowly started to like weight my feet. But because I was a climber, I could kind of hold myself up because I had the upper body strength for it. And so kind of started walking that way with crutches and walkers and all that stuff, and transitioned into being able to walk, wear a shoe on my left foot, but still had a cast on my right leg all the time. And so about 8 months after the accident, Cindy and I went up to Wild Iris with the kids, and I had no intention of climbing. I was like, man, maybe I'll climb, maybe I won't climb, but in my head I was like, I'm not gonna probably climb again, that's kind of too wonky. And our daughter was probably 5 at the time, and she said she was climbing this really short little 5/8 at the OK Corral. And when I belayed her and I lowered her down, and she looked at me and she was like, are you gonna climb? And she just caught me a little bit off guard, and I was like, oh shoot, I don't really have an excuse. So I was like, and Cindy was watching, and I was like, yeah, why not? I'll tie it. My 5-year-old just did that. It'll be fine. Tied in, and I think the climb, I'm being generous when I say it was 30 feet. I just shook my way up this climb. It was horrible. And
Emotionally, mentally,
everything.
physically,
I was certain I was going to explode. I thought everything in my body was going to break again.
Were you scared though?
I was terrified.
Scared of the climbing, or scared of what your body was not allowing you to do that you could once do really well?
Yes.
All the above.
All of it.
Yeah.
All of the above. Like, I was afraid, like, okay, when I stress something in my body, is it going to break? I was certain that was going to happen. And then I was like, as soon as I get to wherever I'm going to get lowered from, I'm going to get dropped again.
Yeah.
I was certain I was going to get dropped again. And the guy belaying me, his name was Jeff. Cindy didn't belay me. She stayed off to the side to just kind of watch. I was like, I don't care what he does, he's going to drop me. This is going to be freaking horrible in front of my kids. I kept thinking they're going to see something they don't want to see. So I get to the anchor. It took me, I felt like days to get to this anchor. And I get to the anchor, and it's 2 bolts again. So I'm looking at the same kind of anchor that I fell from. And the last thing I vividly remember was watching this anchor go away from me. And so when I got to the anchor, I literally could not let go. I was clamped on so hard. And the only reason I let go was I got so pumped and tired I couldn't hold on anymore, and I just let go, and I sat in my harness, and he had me obviously locked off really tightly, and he was as terrified as I was, and I didn't want him to lower me, because then I was like, shit, he's gonna drop me from here. And Cindy just spoke really quietly. She was on this little hill that rose off to my right, and she just said, he's totally had to, just put your feet out in front of you, just walk down, you know what to do. And once I held the rope in front of me, he lowered me back down to the ground. He lowered me probably as slow as I climbed up. I got back to the ground, and I looked at her, and I was like, I'm never climbing again. it.
Oh.
I'm done. I was like, this is it's too terrible. I was scared on so many levels. I couldn't even tell you how many
Wow,
levels.
because it could have gone either way for you. You could have been
Absolutely.
like liberated, like,
Yeah,
oh
like,
my
I'm
God, I still
I'm
got
back.
it.
No, none of that. It was
Wow.
like, that was horrible. Like
Yeah.
everything about that was horrible.
Yeah.
And Cindy was like, all right, I get it. And I sat down and we did, I don't even remember what happened after that, but we went back to our campsite and I was sitting there and I was thinking, the one thing I remembered liking was I liked the way the rock felt on my fingers. That was what I remembered. And I was like, that was kind of cool. Like that part was neat. Everything else terrified me. And so the next day came and we were at the cliff and everybody was climbing and I was like, man, I'll just go up like a little bit and just see if I can feel that again in my hands. And
That's excellent short-term memory.
totally, yeah, exactly. Optimist, short-term memory.
Yeah.
And so I climbed up a little bit and I was like, yeah, there's that feeling again. But again, got to the anchor and I was just scared out of my mind again.
Yeah.
So I was like, God, I can't keep doing this. It's just so stressful. Like on every level, it's stressful. Like your brain is out of control, your heart's out of control, you can't breathe, your body's shaking. And so then I came down. I'm like, you know what? It's not a good idea. I'm done. I'm not kidding. For 1.5 to 2 years, I did that. I was like, I'd climb something, come down, and go, nope, not for me anymore, and I'm done, and gonna find something different, and just did that over and over and over.
Was a big part of that because your kids and your wife were all still into it, and so you were there in the environment, supporting them.
Yeah, probably.
And you're wired.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
part of your DNA at some point. You're
Yeah.
like, this is who I am.
But you might have looked for something else, just like I'm
Right.
gonna start sailing or something.
Yeah, anything. I thought like I'll mountain bike or I had those thoughts like, okay, well, what else could I do to
What
be
else?
active? Because I want to be
Mhm.
active. So
Right.
like, what the hell do I do? And so, and at that point I was climbing with a cast on my leg, so I glued climbing rubber on the cast, one of those walking boots, and I was like, shit, I don't know what else I'm gonna do. Like nothing else really stuck out to me
Yeah.
because I wasn't a sport kid growing up. I was an art school kid. That's what I knew, and so my brother was an athlete. I was never an athlete. No one ever would have looked at me in high school and said, that kid's an athlete. I was, just gawky and awkward. And then all of a sudden I found climbing and I was like, oh, I love this. And so then I could do it and have some kind of proficiency at it and really enjoy it. And so now all of a sudden I'm like, shit, that's gone. Like that is gone. And so kind of over that next year or so, I was like, okay, what do I do with it? And then right around 18 months, I was climbing and my right leg just started getting these wicked pains in it. Just like I was, even to this day, I have a lot of chronic pain from the accident. This pain was like off the chart again. I was like, oh my God, it feels like my leg is broken again. And I thought I broke bones again. And so I went in and the doctor's like, no, your bones are fine. And he's like, I think you have a really bad infection. He's like, if you have a bad infection, we're going to have to amputate your leg. And we had sort of talked about it before, but you never think like, oh yeah, that's it. There's an option.
At the time, were you walking without any assistance?
Yeah, I mean,
Either-
most days,
Yeah.
probably 80% of the time I could walk across a level floor with that cast on, no problem.
And then before the intense pain, were you thinking to yourself, okay, I'm good, my legs are good, I've got my legs, I've got decent mobility.
So what they said to me was, your leg is never going to be out of that cast. So what we're going to do is we're going to make you this special clamshell. But that face you're making was the face I made.
What?
They said it's so fragile. I had 11 screws and 2 plates just in the heel part. And then there was other hardware helping that hardware. So they were like, if you hit it on the ground, if you whack it on something, it's gonna break, and that's what's gonna happen. We put it together with bone putty and screws and plates, and it's not meant to do that. So it's gonna be in some protective device for the rest of your life. And I was like, oh God, this is horrible. So
you had the infection?
I
Probably.
know. So that's what's weird is they were like, we think if you have this infection, we should probably talk about amputating. And I was like, oh God, this is horrible. And I was like, well, okay, let's do the blood work. They did the blood work, and it came back negative. And he was like, okay, so if you don't have that, and we know what you have to go see a brain specialist. And I was like, why do I need to go see a neurosurgeon? And they're like, you need to go see a neurosurgeon. So I walked from one office to the next office to this other neurosurgeon, and he's like, tell me your symptoms. And I don't know what your guys' experience with neurosurgeons are. They're super smart, but they are socially just not so good.
The reason they went in
Oh
that
my God.
subspecialty.
He just he listened. He let me talk, and at the end of my talk, he said, "All right, I know what you got. Hold on." And he walked out, and I was like, "Wow, that was weird." And again, my leg is just singing. It hurts so bad. he comes back in and he has a stack of papers and he puts them on the table and he goes, "This is what you have. It's called reflective sympathetic dystrophy. It's a nerve disorder that you got when you hit the ground. It's never going to go away. You're going to be in a wheelchair in 6 months. My PA will be right in." And he just turned around and walked out. And I was like, what the just happened? And
Bedside manner.
yeah, right. He left. And his PA, this woman was a rock star. She came in, she's like, "Okay, I know." She knew the bomb just went off, and she came in, she's like, "Okay, here's what is really going to happen." And she just kind of said, "This is what it is. These are the drugs we use to kind of help it and knock it down." She's like, "Yes, you do have it the rest of your life. No, you don't have to be in a wheelchair the rest." That's kind of more like, we don't know if that's true or not. So activity is actually a really good thing. So we know you want to be active. Let's just be active and see where it goes. And I really didn't believe that I had it. I was like, he's smart, but he's not that smart. He's wrong. And they gave me this drug called Neurontin. And I walked out to my truck, popped one in my mouth, and in 10 minutes, my leg stopped hurting. I'm like, damn it, he's totally right. And so that started that path of like, well, what do I do with this? And
Pretty nasty side effect profile.
Not a great drug, and it's a drug I have to take the rest of my life because you don't get rid of this nerve disorder. But one of the questions I said was, well, if I amputate my leg, like would that help it or hurt it? Because I don't like what I have right now. My quality of life just wasn't what I wanted, and it just I couldn't do what I wanted to do.
And he was clearly advocating for that.
He was advocating, but he was also super careful to say, "I'm not telling you to do this." And so I went back to my orthopedic surgeon and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of amputating my leg. What do you think?" And he was like, "Oh, I think it's a great idea." And he's like, "I can't tell you that ever. Like, that's not something we say. So if you think if you tell me you want to do it, I'm telling you your leg is junk and it's not going to get better. So let's go ahead and schedule it." And so we went out and literally scheduled it that day.
So just because we all have a couple mutual friends that went through this process, Chad and Malcolm, and I know from talking to both of them that there's this point, this moment where you make that decision and you say, "Okay, let's schedule it. It's done." And then did that happen to you? And was there this feeling of liberation, or were you scared still, or what?
It was the first thing in the whole accident storyline that allowed me to have some power. Because up until that point, the accident kind of dictates everything to you. You're not going to have a good back anymore. You're going to have a spinal cord injury. You're going to have chronic pain. Blah 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 blah. All of a sudden, I could go, you know what? I'm going to take that leg off so that maybe I'll get this quality of life back that I had before. And so it kind of gives you this feeling of power again, where you're like, okay, I'm making some decisions now finally, so good or bad, at least I got to make the decision. So whether I was going to climb or not, I didn't know, but I thought, okay, I can at least say, I'm going to make that decision, and then if it doesn't work, at least I decided that.
I remember, it's not the same, but I lost both my eyes to glaucoma, and I remember the night before I had the surgery, having a beer and saying, "Goodbye, eyes."
Right. You realize, okay, this is a new, the chapter's turning, and it's going to be, I don't know what it's going to look like. Slight humor there, but I knew that it was we're
you guys go on tour.
We are. It's our comedy road trip.
It's you realize, okay, it's going to be different now, and at least I get to decide what that's going to look like. Whether it's good or bad, it's I didn't know that an amputation was going to help me or hurt me. I just knew it was going to be very, very different. So I think I went in a month later, I went in on December 2nd, and I amputated 8 inches below my patellar tendon, so that I could have a long prosthetic and be able to climb again, or at least try it and make a good run at climbing again. And I was climbing 4 months after the amputated. I was back out with a prosthetic, climbing on a rope. Not as terrified as I was still terrified, but not as terrified, at least, because I felt okay, I'm a little bit more solid now.
You weren't as breakable.
Yeah, that foot's not going to break anymore. So now I was just more paying attention to my left foot and my back and neck, obviously.
And you have a lot of people to look to, like Hugh and all those folks, right? So do you have to become an engineer, or were you engineer-oriented before that? Or
No, not at all. And Hugh was great. He reached out to me really quickly. I think
Hugh is a scientist at MIT, by the way, and
brilliant guy.
Double leg amputee, and is part of the No Barriers community as well.
And
an amazing climber.
Amazing climber. And he reached out to me and said, "Hey, here's what's going on. He was funny. He said to me, don't rush the first year, because he's like, I'm just going to tell you I did, and it was a mistake.
Right.
I think he fell off a hangboard or something, if I'm remembering it correctly. And I was like, he told me that, and I was like, yeah, no, he's totally wrong. I'm gonna push that first year and get back out. And probably 6 months after, so I went climbing 4 months after. 6 months after, I tripped and fell without my prosthetic on because I was being an idiot and broke my stump open. And I was like, oh, that's why he said that. Like, he was probably smart. And I haven't
He said
told
that
him
a few times.
He said that a few times.
Yeah.
And I should, next time I see him, I should tell him that. But I was like, damn it, he's so much smarter than me. Which we all know that anyway. But he was great about like, we can make prosthetics. You can climb again if you want to. You can kind of figure it all out. If you have questions, don't be afraid to ask. That was actually one of the first introductions into the adaptive world that I had, was people like him saying, hey, this isn't the end of the world. Like, it's you're gonna be fine. Like, I know this sounds really weird, but like, it's actually gonna be fine. And when you're in it, you're like, oh God, there's no way it's gonna be fine. But then you're like, now you're able to look back with hindsight and go, oh yeah, he's totally right.
How do you build your climbing foot and leg? Do you like have somebody build it? Do you go into your garage? I mean, what do you do?
First,
and what's it look like?
First off, I started in the garage with tinkering with wood and playing with metal, and then I went to my prosthetist in Windsor and said, I want to make a harder foot that won't break, and so he made me one out of titanium, and we coated it with rubber, Rock and Riesel. I sent it to Rock and Riesel in a box, and I was like, I need rubber on
Which
this.
is a climbing,
Which is a
a
climbing
company that does Riesel's climbing shoes, right?
They're based in Boulder, and they're amazing, and he was like, yeah, he's like, just give me some time, and he figured out how to put rubber on it that stayed, and then I climbed with that for, like 2 years, and it worked great. And then talking with different companies and partnering up with Evolve, who is a climbing company in California, who wanted to make it more just better, really. And so we partnered with TRS, who is another prosthetic company in Boulder, and Evolve, and we made a foot that was a little more durable. Titanium is very durable, but it's really bad for rubber. It tears rubber off.
Right.
And so TRS was like, well, how can we make this more compliant with the rock? And so they came up with a foot that actually fits inside this little shoe. It looks like a baby shoe. And I climbed on that for quite some time. Because the first time, like, I went back to climbing and kind of ramped up slowly, and I would chew through the rubber on the titanium foot, gosh, in 2 weeks. So like, if I did a long climb, like if I went out to Yosemite and climbed something, like on El Cap, where you're going for like 30 pitches straight, I would need a foot as soon as I got done. Whereas this foot, I could climb El Cap once or twice and never even.
It was a little baby climbing shoe.
It's a baby climbing shoe, and everyone always thinks it's a kid's shoe, which is awesome.
Right.
I think it makes it more endearing to people.
Do you have a heel on that thing?
There's
Because,
no.
yeah,
it's a small heel, not like a heel like our foot.
Can you heel hook, or will you pull your leg off?
It's really uncomfortable when you heel.
Heel hooking is when you put your foot up high and like hook your heel on something. It's kind of an athletic.
It's very.
Yeah.
You used to be able to do that when you were in your 30s, right?
Yeah, I can't get my
Yeah.
my foot past my belly button
There's
now.
no way your feet should be up there anymore. There's absolutely no way. But yeah, it's an amazing tool. It works on many different fields of like, from very hard vertical stuff to steep stuff so it kind of works in lots of different areas, and that's why I love that foot. So.
Okay, well, this was obviously, I mean, and now I'm starting to see all the ingredients, right,
Yes.
of your recipe and how it all kind of came together to lead us to the beginning of this conversation, which was adaptive climbing,
Right.
and you realizing that you've had this experience and you're not willing to give it up. Matter of fact, you pioneered through it like so many of the other folks in our community. But then when was it that you said to yourself, and perhaps why did you say to yourself, I'm going to make my mission in life to be able to introduce other folks to this sport that I love, even with the spectrum of injuries or
Right.
experiences that they've had?
And I mean, it's funny. I always tell people I got into it by accident, because like I really did.
Yeah.
I had an
It
accident.
was an accident.
And then I was in Yosemite. I climbed in Yosemite with my friend Hans Florine, and
You climbed El Capitan.
We climbed El Cap together. We did the first amputee ascent in a day, and he was like, "Oh, you should come back with a bunch of disabled folks and climb it by yourselves, and you should do more of this with disabled people." And I was like, "Nah, it's a dumb idea." Flew back here, and my friend Timmy O'Neill had started a nonprofit called Paradox Sports, and he was like, I came back, and he texted me, and he's like, "Hey, I'm taking some veterans climbing on Saturday. They're missing their legs. You should come down." That's actually how I met Chad Jukes, and he said,
Chad Jukes is a single leg amputee.
Army
Ice
veteran.
climbing, right?
Mountaineer.
Mountaineer ice
Mountaineer
climber,
does,
right.
he does a little bit
Well,
of
he was-
everything.
He was on our inaugural No Barriers Warriors trip to Logoche in Nepal.
Yeah, there you go.
Very
Yeah.
amazing beard.
Great guy, amazing hair. And he to me was like, come on down, and I think anyone gets offered this kind of an opportunity, they jump at it. But me being the selfish climber, I was like, nope, I don't want anything to do with it. And he's a very persuasive guy. He just said, well, I'll see you Saturday at 8 o'clock. And so I was like, shit. And
Timmy
so,
O'Neill, yeah.
Timmy O'Neill.
You can't say no to him.
It's impossible.
Yes.
So 8 o'clock, I was there Saturday in El Dorado State Park, which is a canyon right near us in Boulder, and I took these guys climbing. Jukesy was one of those guys. And I was like, at the end of the day, I was blown away by how much, not only fun, but just like how inspired I was by these guys. They just blew me away. They're just like determination to just get back after it. And so I was like, oh yeah, and they're asking me questions, and I'm like, oh, this is what I did. And
Yeah.
we started sharing ideas, and that's where it all came from. And then that kind of propelled me down that path of adaptive climbing.
Did you find there was kind of a glue that like tied you all together?
I think that there's like a lot of different things. There's the idea that most of the folks, and Eric, you know this, like the sense of humor and the camaraderie that goes along with all this stuff is amazing. So everybody kind of is very lighthearted about what they're doing. Even if it's gnarly, they're just joking about it, having a good time. And then that sense of, that other person went through something heavy as well. So there's like this camaraderie of that. We've all kind of been through the machine, as it were, and come out the other side and said, okay, well, I'm still here, so I still want to have this.
A lot of
quality
blind and
life.
stump jokes
A
happening.
lot of blind and stump jokes.
Yeah.
Yeah, leg jokes, cane jokes, hide the cane, all
Had
that
you
stuff.
found your that part of your community up to that point? Was that day sort of a turning point
That
for you?
no, I didn't. And so when people meet me who aren't disabled, they're very careful how they speak, and I see it still to this day. And I'm sure Eric, I'm sure you have that too. They're very careful about like, well, we don't want to say anything because maybe Craig doesn't know he doesn't have this world that I love. Like, so it was climbing. I have only ever been a climber, so all of a sudden they said, well, we want you to just be a climber, but we also want you to be this adaptive climber who can help them. And I'm not like an able-bodied person who can go home and turn it off at night. I'm a disabled person all the time, obviously. So for me, it's just who I was, and I think it took that time for me to go, oh, this is actually who I'm supposed to be now. And so I don't know that I had that clarity ever in my life. I think in retrospect, looking back, I'm like, nah, I just kind of drifted through stuff. And all of a sudden I had this clarity through the accident of what people look at and go, God, that's so horrible, and that's terrible, all the things you've lost. And to me, it's like, I wouldn't trade any of it. It's like the things I've gained from the accident, just, I can't even count them. So, and I get to give that to other people now, which is amazing.
It's just such a wonderful byproduct when you reach out to help people and to elevate other people, that it probably became a form of therapy for you.
Oh, yeah.
And you clearly get so much from doing what you do, otherwise you wouldn't do
Perspective.
it. Right?
I always tell people perspective is a valuable tool to have, because I go in and I meet these folks and they're, say they've lost their leg. They'll start asking me about my leg, and then we start talking about accidents, and then they'll usually know what happened to me. Well, they'll look at me and go, well, crap, he has this laundry list of injuries, and I have the leg thing, he has the leg thing, so I'm not that bad. He's worse than me, and that's fine with me. And so it's like, perspective is good. It's like a good thing to have in your quiver.
Do you think you would have been a teacher if you had lost your leg?
No, I would have just been, I'm no joke, I would have just kept doing exactly what I was doing. I would have gone back to climbing. I would have been the self-absorbed typical climber that I know and love. And so because that, like I said, like that worked really, really well for us. And like Cindy and I were perfectly content to do that.
Being dirtbags. Being
dirtbags, yeah. And now I'm still a dirtbag, but it's like now I work in this world that like appreciates the dirtbag and the disabled. So it's the disabled dirtbag, the D
You
squared.
just have a nicer band.
I have a nicer van.
That's
so
usually the
true.
indicator.
That is
That's
so
the
true.
indicator.
That is so
But
true.
you can probably relate as well to the vets and the folks with
Oh yeah.
psychological stuff like PTSD, right?
Yeah,
As
'cause
well. I mean,
Everyone
because
has
you've been through
PTSD.
some of that.
Yeah, everyone has it to some level. So now all of a sudden when the vets come in, they're like, oh God, you went through that, and I went through this, and then we trade war stories back and forth, and it's like, oh yeah, that's what PTSD is, and so here's how we're gonna work with that. Here's how we're gonna kind of work through that.
Do you
a
think
little
you're cured from that, or do you think that's something that stays with you?
bit. I don't know that anyone's cured from that. I think you just learn to compartmentalize it. I think that's what climbers are good at, and that's what I'm good at, is compartmentalizing and saying, okay, I'm just gonna put that over there now. It's like fear. Like, you can have fear. There's good fear. There's bad fear, but you just put it off to the side and say, okay, I'm not gonna deal with that right now.
Right.
I'll know you're healed.
And before we end, you gotta talk about this disabled ascent of El Capitan. Wasn't that guy Pete Davis?
Peter Davis.
And he's an arm amputee,
Yeah,
which I find
incredible.
almost the most
He's a
insane thing
rock
I've
star.
ever heard of. He's got
Yeah.
like an arm that ends at the elbow, right?
Yeah,
And he
just-
leads
yeah.
like 5'10", right?
Yeah, he leads harder than 5'10".
5 harder than
I think
5'10",
5, but yeah, I mean, he's a rock
which
star.
is a high. He climbs at a
High-end
high
guy.
level. So how the heck does he do it? And tell us about that ascent.
He is born. He was born without his arm, so he has just below his elbow. He has a bit of a stump there, and he's just always been a climber and a kayaker, and he's just a rock star. And been good friends with him for a long time. And I called him up and I said, "Hey man, I think we should all climb El Cap together." And we took another friend of ours, Jeremy Fry, along, who's he's an above the knee amputee. And we went out. Jeremy and I went out the year before and got shut down on this route on El Cap, and I went back and climbed the nose in a day with Hans, and Hans said, you just have to get the right team. You just need more people.
Right.
3 is a better big wall number anyway. So called Pete up and signed on, and we did went out and did Zodiac the following season, and took us 5 days. So not a speed ascent at all, but like just fun, sitting on the portaledges, hanging out. Jeremy had never climbed El Cap before. Pete had done El Cap one time, I think, and I think that was my 5th time up. So it was just kind of fun to hang out on the portaledges, and we ended up making a film called Gimp Monkeys. Some friends followed us. That was
More politically incorrect.
It's super politically
title.
incorrect. Love
Humor.
that title. And so yeah, they.
But it was probably a leg up on all the other documentaries.
Leg up, yeah. It was.
I figured I
You
would
stole
join.
that from me.
Somebody
I figured I'd
should
join
yeah,
in.
somebody should do it. Yeah, and that all kind of led me, down that adaptive road, which pushed me into adaptive adventures and all that stuff. So it kind of all funnels you into this cool way of life then.
Tell us about your film that's out now.
We have a film out right now called Craig's Reaction, which is touring with Banff and Mountain Film, and it is about basically what happened after the accident. So they followed us, myself and my family, for about a year. So kind of with the adaptive adventures things that we do and the climbing things we do, because we still obviously climb as much as we did before, and then we kind of work that all around the adaptive stuff that we do as well.
So it's touring at different festivals. and
It's at
things like
different
that.
festivals, and it's also available on Amazon and on iTunes. They can get it.
And one more question for you. So say anybody that's listening, whether they're a veteran or civilian, can they just come in and apply online for some of the programming?
Yeah, they want to
you
learn
do?
to climb or
Yeah, they don't
kayak
even have
or
to
whatever.
apply. So they can find me 2 ways. They can go to adaptiveadventures.org, or they can find me there, or they can find me at craigdemartino.com, and then I'll connect us all together anyway. So either way they want to do it, they can find us. They don't even apply. They just tell us where they want to be, and then we'll be there, and we'll go climbing.
I love it.
I love it.
Strong
It's
work,
amazing.
man. Way to make the world a better place.
Yeah, thank you.
You're
Thank
awesome.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you
Craig.
guys. Love it.
Whew, wow, that was fantastic.
I
That
know.
was amazing. Legend for sure. All right, I'll take away
Not
the
sort of,
I'll
yeah,
take
get rid
the
of the sort of
now. All right, Eric, give me some of your takeaways, bro.
Well, I just love this continuing idea that you keep seeing in different people, that something happens to you and then you try to sort of quote unquote climb your way back to where you were. And then in the process, which is like a kind of a miserable process, you find something new. So Craig finds that he's a teacher and he connects in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you'd never know that unless you went through the experience.
Yeah.
Which is so ironic and so sort of, I guess, crazily unfair in a way, right? That you only learn certain things through going through this process of suffering.
It's almost like the snake has to shed its skin in order to find its real body and its real soul.
Yeah.
Like it has to get rid of the old thing. And in some cases, like when you said goodbye to your eyes, or when Craig said goodbye to his leg, it was almost like you were shedding that old version of yourself and then really embracing this new version of you that you don't even know. And then it sort of propels you into this place that you could never have imagined.
But you have to stay open to it. You know what I mean? Because, I mean, unlike Craig, a lot of people shut down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And we've seen that, right? Like you just go the other direction, but people like Craig, you know, or like some of the other pioneers that we know, and just say, you know, I'm going to refuse to allow this to turn into something else. I want to let it be this. And certain people are just wired like that, and Craig's one of those people.
Well, thanks everyone. If you want to learn more about No Barriers, go to nobarriersusa.org, learn about our summit. It's really incredible coming to our summit in June, which will be in Lake Tahoe, because you can meet tons and tons of pioneers. And a lot of the pioneers are teaching our clinics and activities and speaking. And so you'll get to hang out with folks who are really on the cutting edge. So hope you'll join us, and thanks for joining us everyone. No Barriers.
See you next time.
Thanks, buddy.
Easy peasy.
Well done,
Thanks,
man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, that was great. I mean,
Crazy.
we went way longer because.
Oh, well, yeah.
that was-